In today's video, I'm going to show you how to use the CSS Clamp function for responsive text sizing. Last week we worked on this responsive text animation that broke onto multiple lines, and we did this character by character animation using overflow hidden to give us this sort of cool mask effect. Now in this example here, I'm using font size 12 viewport height units, which means that as the width of the browser window changed, the size of the font stayed the same, okay? And this basically worked well for my example. We could have it split on 3 lines, perhaps even 4 lines at some point. But when we go really wide, what happens is you'll see that we only get it on 1 line. And what I want to do is make sure that when we have all of this space here, maybe we can pump up the font size a little bit more and break it onto 2 lines. Now when we're using viewport height units, the font size will change if we make the browser size change its height, okay? But in reality, in practical use, your users probably aren't changing the height of their browser much once the page reloads, okay? Most of our responsive design is going to be based off the width of the viewport. So I'm going to switch over to this other forked version here where I've basically just disabled the JavaScript by commenting it out. You'll see that my CSS still has that 12 viewport height unit in there. But what I want to do is switch this over to viewport width. And once I do that, you're going to see the page reloads. And notice how the text breaks onto 3 lines with 1 word hanging off here. Now, as I change the width of the browser window, notice that the text just scales down. It never reflows. It's all based on the width of the viewport, if you will, all right? So we're never going to reflow the text on different lines. It's only going to scale the text, all right? Now the problem with this is that at a certain point it's going to get so small that it's ridiculous, and when we get really super wide here, we have all this space, and it's probably not necessary to have this one little word hanging off here at the end. We can probably use this space a little bit better by adjusting the font size when we get this big, okay? So what we're going to do is introduce a concept called CSS Clamp, which allows us to set a minimum value, a preferred value, and a maximum value. So instead of saying we're always going to be 12 viewport width units, what I can do is sort of force it into a range. And to do that, I'm going to use the clamp method, and I'm going to pass in my minimum, and right now I'm going to say maybe we'll make it around 50 pixels. My preferred size is going to be that 12 viewport width units to start, and then my maximum, let's just say something like, I don't know, 80 pixels. This isn't going to be my preferred settings, but it is going to get us close to something that we can experiment with, okay? So right now, on refresh, we have 2 lines. As I change the size, you'll see that the text does reflow, and now it's staying on 1 line, okay? So, what's happening there? Let's scrunch down a little bit more, and then we're going to get to a point where we are sort of flexible, where you'll see the font is actually scaling. And then we're going to get to a point where the font is no longer going to scale and it's just going to rewrap, okay? So what we've done here is we've hit our minimum value of 50 pixels. It's never going to get smaller than that. So since the font size can't change smaller, it's going to be forced to break onto multiple lines down here until it gets so sort of ridiculous that you'd never want to see it that way. Going the other way, we're going to get to a point where it's going to be above 50 pixels and we can scale up, but only until we reach 80 pixels in height. Now that seems far too restrictive right now, so let's double that and make it like 160. That's going to be 1600 probably, so let's just make it 160. And now you'll see that we can get much bigger, but at a certain point, again, it's going to stop scaling. So here we're making pretty good use of our vertical and horizontal space. When we get down to here though, I don't really want to see this 1 word hanging out here. So what we can do is for this sort of middle range here, is we can change our preferred value, all right? So that for this sentence here, we never really see it broken up like this. So to do that, I'm just going to bump this up to maybe 14 viewport width units, and now we get at least 2 words here. So in this range, you'll see we're scaling the text, and then at a certain point, it's no longer going to scale, but will break onto 2 lines. So we have 2 lines. There's one part where one word is hanging off, but really not that often. And then we're going to get to a certain size, and we're no longer going to scale anymore, and we'll start the wrapping, if you will. All right. So clamp is an awesome way for us to sort of set these minimum, preferred, and maximum values. All right, so before I go, I want to do some more things with clamp. I'm just going to take this text here and I'm going to replace it with something else. And it says the text should scale nicely for any screen size. Now, for the purpose of this demo, I had taken off my minimum width value, all right, so I could make this really super small, or narrow, I should say. But we never really want the screen to get this narrow and accommodate that sort of line breaking there. And on the other side of things, maybe there's a point where we don't want our text to go super wide, okay? Maybe we want to cut it off at, like, I don't know, 1,000 pixels or so, as most websites do. So in my CSS here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my full screen element here. I'm going to give it a background color of, we'll just do something, what did I say? Delicate and flaky, like salmon. And now we should see exactly, that it is full screen. It's 95 viewport widths wide. Its height is 100 viewport height units, and it has a padding left of 5 viewport width units, and it's naturally 100% the width of its parent. Now using clamp, I can set its width to have a preferred value, a minimum, and a max. So let's use our clamp function here as well. I don't want this full screen element to ever be less than 400 pixels wide. I'd prefer it to be mostly full screen, like let's say 95 viewport width units, but I never want it to go over 1000 pixels. Let me put in my little semicolon there, and now we should see something, a little bit different, all right? As I scrunch down here, notice that in this range we have the text scaling, and we also have the salmon background going all the way across, okay? And when I get super small here, boom, where are you? We're going to see a scroll bar comes in because we can't get less than 400 pixels wide on that element, so we then have to scroll to see the rest of it. Now, no one should be sizing their windows down less than 400 pixels these days, but let's see what we get here. As I scroll or make it wider, we get to this breakpoint at 1000 pixels where we're no longer going to be making this element wider, all right? Now, it looks like I probably could have a little bit of wiggle room in there and maybe make that breakpoint just a little bit further, okay? So let's just say, you know what? Let's make that 1200 pixels. And now as I scale wider, there we go. We're no longer going all the way across. We're capping it off at 1200 there. So hopefully you can see now that we do have quite a range of responsive settings that we can add without using any media queries. With these settings in place, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make the visibility hidden by default again. I'm going to get rid of my background of salmon, and in my JavaScript, let me just turn everything back on and let's see how this animates. So I'm going to select everything, I'm going to uncomment, and now we should have our line by line. Very nice. So on maybe a mobile screen, it's going to come in like that, and on your average desktop, oh, it's beautiful. And if we go super wide, still nice, all right? But it's not taking up the whole screen because we're using clamp to set a maximum width for that full screen element, all right? So hopefully you can now see all these different ways that we can use CSS and GreenSock together to get very reasonable or preferable results for a multiple of screen sizes. As always, a lot of this has to do with personal preference. How big should the text be? How much of the screen should it take up? Where do you want it breaking? Some things you don't have control over. But with clamp, you can get really close to things working really good most of the time at most sizes. As I was moving things around, there is occasionally going to be a time maybe where things do break and you have like that word size, I think, where was it? Oh, come on, just go down a little bit lower. Came onto, where are you? One line. Maybe it's not so common, all right? But that stuff is always going to happen. You're always going to have different amount of letters in your words. You're not going to be able to control the line breaks, but hopefully you can see, again, what we're going for here is most of the time at most screen sizes, we get really favorable results. And again, it's all animated perfectly with GreenSock. Hopefully you enjoyed this lesson. You've learned something about Clamp that you can use in your own layouts and animations. Do you want to gain mastery of the GreenSock animation platform through more videos like this? I'll show you all the tips and tricks I've learned over a decade of using GSAP, working at GreenSock, and teaching it to thousands of developers like you. My training is guaranteed to save you hours of frustration as you learn to add ultra-slick animations to all your web projects. Visit creativecodingclub.com today to unlock the world's most comprehensive GreenSock training. And let me help you discover the joy of animating with code.